right wing wants us to do is to turn on each other. They want to divide us up by the color of our skin, or where we were born, or what our religion is, or what our sexual orientation is. That's how they win. They divide us up. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I do know that 99% is a hell of a bigger number than 1%. And I do know that if we stand together, we are the vast majority of people, we can defeat Trumpism.
Senator Bernie Sanders, whose anti-oligarchy message is resonating around the country with crowds that have exceeded the turnout of some presidential rallies, despite there being no election anytime soon. His tour, alongside Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is spotlighting the billionaire takeover of our federal government, a takeover that is worsening the struggles of American workers. In response to the record-breaking crowds, AOC told her followers on Friday, quote, "Something special is happening, folks." Something is indeed happening. The Fight Oligarchy tour is becoming a kind of a release valve for American workers, giving voice to their long-simmering anger at an economy that they feel is rigged against them. In some cases, they're right. Sanders' unapologetic brand of economic populism, once full of things that average Americans considered far left abstractions, has been animated by the re-election of Donald Trump, as Trump surrounds himself with billionaires who seem out of touch with the economic realities of millions of Americans. And one billionaire in particular who's taken a metaphorical chainsaw to federal agencies and programs that serve millions of working and middle-class Americans. But while this chapter started 63 days ago when Trump was sworn in, the story of this movement stretches back more than 5 decades, when market deregulation and globalization took hold of the U.S. economy. Americans were sold the narrative that an unfettered market and unfettered trade would lead to prosperity for all. Greater trade meant higher GDP growth, more valuable stocks, and higher wages. What happened was so-called trickle-down economics, or actually it didn't. Lots and lots of wealth was created. It didn't actually trickle down. What Americans got instead was a massive transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% up to the top 1%. According to a recent report from the Rand Corporation, a global policy think tank, the gap between what most workers earn today and what they would have earned if income inequality had stayed at 1975 levels has grown by a staggering $79 trillion. That's largely because the top 1% is capturing an ever-growing share of the nation's wealth, which brings us to today. Americans are paying more for many things, from groceries and utilities to clothing, rent, appliances, and, of course, eggs. And forget luxuries such as higher education and a starter home. We're repeatedly told that inflation is to blame. Yet a recent analysis reveals something far more troubling. Since 2020, corporations have raked in $1.5 trillion in excess profits beyond their pre-pandemic earnings, according to Federal Reserve estimates. That $1.5 trillion came from your pockets. Since the pandemic, the average American household has paid an additional $12,000 to inflate corporate profit margins, according to the venture capitalist and civic activist Nick Hanauer. To put that in perspective, $12,000 could cover more than 2 years' worth of groceries for the average American family. To quote Hanauer, inflation isn't the problem, it's corporate greed, and it's a choice. Now, with Trump's ascent to power, the mask of faux economic populism has come off, replaced by the more honest mask of unabashed corporate greed. Since taking office, both Trump and Elon Musk have been working to dismantle vital agencies that serve America's working and middle class, while also firing tens of thousands of federal workers as promised in Project 2025. That includes hobbling the Social Security Administration's ability to provide services, with dozens of field offices that are scheduled to close across the country. Meanwhile, a new report released Friday predicts record-breaking debt under Trump's tax cuts. According to the Tax Policy Center, a nonpartisan think tank, tax cuts would give America's top 0.1% a tax break of $278,000, while 28 million households in the bottom 80% would see no change in their tax bill, and 14 million in the bottom 80% would actually see their taxes go up. Meanwhile, the impact of DOGE cuts couldn't come at a worse time for the average American. Despite rising incomes last year, the number of Americans living in poverty has increased. And that's according to the U.S. Census Bureau, largely because of the skyrocketing cost of living, erasing any net gains in salary. Last year also marked the first time since 2003 that the income gap between men and women widened. Women earning just 82.7 cents for every dollar that men earn. Princeton professor of philosophy Matthew Desmond writes, quote, "What do you call it when you don't qualify for a housing voucher but can't get a mortgage either? When the rent takes half your paycheck and your student loan debt takes another quarter? When you dip below the poverty line one month and then rise above it the next without ever feeling a sense of stability? As a lived reality, there is plenty of poverty above the poverty line. Poverty isn't a line. It's a tight knot of social maladies. It is connected to every social problem we care about: crime, health, education, housing. And its persistence in American life means that millions of families are denied safety and security and dignity in one of the richest nations in the world." Joining me now is Matthew Desmond. He's a professor of sociology at Princeton University. He's a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine and author of multiple books, including Poverty by America. Matthew, great to see you. Thank you for joining us. You know, we've sort of, I think most of us have debunked this trickle-down economics theory. It doesn't work. Rich people just get rich, and for whatever reason, it doesn't actually trickle down. But we have believed in the concept of upward mobility in the United States, and that if you track America from about 1980 till about 5 years ago, hasn't really been true for the middle class. Sure, standard of living has increased, but wages haven't moved substantially compared to those in the top 20% or the top 5% or the top 1%.
It used to be the case that social mobility was the rule in America. Today, it's basically a coin flip, whether your kids do better than you as adults. And we know the recipe for this. You know, wages for too many Americans have stagnated, housing and healthcare costs have skyrocketed, and more Americans are feeling that pinch. So the American dream is fading for far too many of us.
It's kind of interesting because what we heard from everybody and pollsters and voters is that this last election was about economics and it was about inflation. But what we're seeing now is a frustration that's playing out at some of these rallies that's much deeper than that. It's not about the inflation of the last few years. It's about the general unfairness of the way wealth has been distributed around this country.
Right. This is a long story. You know, for men today, for example, without a college degree, their real wages, their inflation-adjusted wages, are less than they would have been 50 years ago. And a huge reason for that is workers have lost power. You know, as unions lost power, our jobs got a lot worse. So one sociologist put it like this: you know, our grandparents had careers and our parents had jobs and we complete tasks. This is kind of the slide of the American working class. And this is what so many Americans are fed up with.
And we're seeing that being fed up manifest. The Rutgers professor Eric Blank had this to say on Blue Sky. He said, of course, it's extremely dangerous that so many establishment liberals, Schumer, Columbia, Paul Weiss, the law firm, are capitulating to Trump. But the silver lining is that this has enabled anti-corporate forces such as labor unions and AOC Bernie to set the tenor of resistance, because today's anti-Trump resistance is more focused on economic concerns, more rooted in labor unions, and more anti-billionaire. It's got the potential to sink much deeper roots among working people, and in doing so, to definitively overcome MAGA. Do you believe that to be true?
I think there is a large sentiment in America that so many of us are feeling, both on the right and the left. So most Democrats and most Republicans think the minimum wage is too low. Most Democrats and most Republicans think the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. So I think that so many Americans all across the country, rural and urban places, want more economic justice, want a capitalism that serves them, not the other way around. Now the trick for us is how to harness that into a political movement, how to take that energy and translate it into policies that serve Americans.
And it is interesting because you can add or subtract race or gender or political party, but you've pointed out that the poorest families in America, of whatever race or political party, receive about $26,000 in government support. The richest families in America receive 40% more in social benefits. Talk to me about how that works. How is it that the wealthiest are benefiting from this safety net that Elon Musk is targeting for waste, fraud, and abuse?
Because we have a tax system that serves the rich. We have to count tax breaks as part of our welfare state. They cost the government money and they put money in our pocket. And we're seeing this again in the new extension of the tax breaks.
Right.
The top 5% of Americans are going to receive half of all the new tax breaks that the Trump administration has proposed. And so this is what we're doing in America. We're giving the most to families that need it the least. And then we have like the audacity to make up stories about poor people's dependency on government aid and slash their funding over and over again to pay.
Why do we get away with that? Why does anybody get away with that, Matthew? I mean, why can't we see that? If you get a tax break, my tax dollars are subsidizing that tax break, whether it's good or bad, right? All of our tax money is paying for whether you get a tax break or you get Social Security or you get something else. It's all the same. It's all the same money.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. So if I get a tax break for owning a home, for example, the government could issue me a check or they could give me a break during tax time. It's the same accounting. Many of us don't recognize how we benefit over and over and over again from government help, but many of us do, and we're unwilling to do the hard moral thing of saying, hey, I'm connected to this problem. I don't think I should benefit from the mortgage interest deduction or wealth transfers. What am I going to do about that? And I think as more and more Americans say, look, I don't like this. I'm going to turn away from this. I'm going to write my congressperson saying, this makes no sense.
Right.
You know, I want an America that gives most to homeless kids and less to homeowners for their second home, for example. That's the kind of country I want to live in. And I think that those of us that are benefiting from this unbalanced welfare state need to get more skin in the game. And Congress needs to take a moral high ground and act on that.
Matthew, this is a longer conversation, so I'll invite you back to continue it. But thank you for starting it with us today. Matthew Desmond is a professor of sociology at Princeton University, contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, and author of multiple books, including Poverty by America.